This story is a tad lengthy, but I'll try to make it as short and sweet as possible. This incident happened when I was 14 years old. I'm now 23. My dad was at the time a whitewater raft guide and would often be out of town during peak seasons, leaving me, my older sister of 7 years, and my stepmother at our home nestled in front of the Cherokee National Forest in East Tennessee. It was later in the evening of a Friday night. My sister and I decided we wanted to go get Subway before they closed. So we asked our stepmom and she said sure. So my sister and I get into the car and head to Subway, which is only a couple miles away. As we pull out from the stop sign at an intersection, I notice a car get behind us. Not unusual, just that we lived in a sleepy small town, so maybe I knew them. Anyway, we didn't think much of it. We arrive at Subway, which is at a shabby shopping center where an old White's grocery store that was right beside of the restaurant. It's dark at this point, and the car pulls into the dark, unlit parking lot where a lot of local high schoolers hung out. I quickly thought it was just another teen hanging out. I was wrong. We finish our order and leave with our food in our hands, and I notice the car's headlights flick on as we're opening our car doors. I then mentioned it to my sister and she shrugged it off. So we drove away from Subway to the exit of the parking lot, and the unknown driver of the white Ford Probe floored it across the parking lot, running over the curb to keep up behind us. This definitely scared my older sister. There's multiple ways to get to our house, so we took the most intricate and confusing way to someone who doesn't know where they're going. We were scared and just wanted to get home. The vehicle kept up with us until a few turns before our neighborhood. As I mentioned before, we lived on top of a hill, and in the forest was behind us, but in front of us were 3 streets forming a valley-like structure. We get closer to our house, and since we lost the follower, we figured we were being paranoid. We get into our driveway and walk inside and kind of jokingly tell our story to our stepmom, and in the midst of our story, we see headlights from a car in front of our house. My sister looks out the window. It's the white Probe. We're scared at this point because this person either was very aware of where we live or was a neighbor we weren't aware of. They sit outside our house for what seems like a really long time, and before my stepmom gets her phone to call my father to ask if he would have any ideas of who this was, they drive off. Odd, right? We sit and eat our food uncomfortable, but trying to shrug it off, we see the old vehicle outside again, and 4 more times later, my father was called. He wasn't sure who it was, but assured us we were okay, that we had firearms in the house, and we live in a safe neighborhood. That's all he could do through a phone call and in Florida. Maybe it was someone who was lost, or thought they knew my sister. We didn't know. My stepmom has to work the next day, and since it was the weekend, my sister and I slept in late. We woke up around 11 a.m. and decided to play some video games. Shortly after we started playing, there's a knock on our front door. Nobody should be knocking. We don't answer. It keeps going, and it gets harder. Now, from our living room, you could see in the kitchen. My dad, being a nature lover, had built a ceiling-to-floor window in the kitchen to sip coffee and watch nature. This is important. The knocking subsides, and my sister is trying to find her Motorola flip phone to call our stepmom and police. As she's doing that, we both see the man peering inside our large kitchen window, and as we make eye contact, he turns and walks up the hill into the national forest. The police arrive several minutes later, and so does our stepmom, who was also beside herself. The police ask if we knew who this could possibly be, and why whoever this was would have left a note on our door. A note on our door, I thought, until we were reading the poorly written note that was written on a torn corner of a piece of sticky pad paper that read, "I wasn't planning on hurting anyone." We told the officers what happened, and that he went up to the hill into the forest. So they did a quick scan and said they didn't see anyone, and that we really just need to keep everything locked up for a while, be vigilant, and if we experience this again, to give them a call. We moved shortly thereafter this event for other reasons, but to the man driving the white Ford Probe, let's not meet. Me and my mother were driving through our small town in Southwest Virginia. My mother and father are divorced, and he lived in Tennessee. They had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, etc. But there was a woman walking down the road, mind you. It's very hot outside, it's the summertime, and I noticed she's carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket, which struck me as a poor choice considering it was the middle of the summer. Just seems too warm for a swaddle. So I said to Mom, "We really need to pick that woman up. Surely she isn't far from where she needs to go, but she has a baby." And to my surprise, my mom pulls into the gas station parking lot, tells me to go in and get a large bottle of water, and we will ask her if she would like a ride. So we pull out of the gas station and approach the thin, almost sickly-looking woman, and she very quietly just grabbed the door handle and got inside, not saying anything at all, not even a thank you, which really didn't sit right with me because this is the South. Everyone is friendly and approachable, for the most part. So I ask where she's needing to go, and me being in the passenger seat, I turn to look at her and she's looking down at her baby and cooing at it. She replies without even looking up from the swaddled being, about 2 miles past the Dollar General on Jeb Stewart. We were very close to that area. I decided to turn and speak to the woman and maybe get a conversation going. But as I get a better look at her baby, it actually was a drywall hammer wrapped in a blanket, inside another blanket. I froze. It was like I walked into a deep freezer. I told my mom that I really think we should stop because I hear what sounds like knocking, and was very adamant we needed to stop at the upcoming Dollar General. As we pull in, I told my mom to get out of the car, that I needed her help locating the noise, and we met each other at the hood of the car, where I told her, "Mom, that's not a baby. She has a hammer in that blanket." To which my mother advised me that we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help close that up, and told the woman we would be right back. We walked inside and told them to call the police so that they could help this woman, that we could no longer have her in our vehicle, and explained why. My mom gave her some vague reason as to why we couldn't take her further, and she got out of the vehicle very angrily, but almost confused, and we left her in the parking lot. She very well could have just been a really confused woman, maybe with some mental issues. I don't know what was going on with her, but I do know that I don't think she had good intentions for us. So to the lady with the drywall hammer, let's not meet again. This is a convoluted story, so bear with me, as I try to convey everything I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my ex-housemate could have potentially been a serial killer, or serial killer in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances my housemate/landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay, and well, people have their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job and enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that he would be around the house drinking and using meth. He would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the 3rd time he said this, and I asked why he keeps saying that, and he said, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days, he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes, he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death, and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up. But when he would get tweaking, he'd always come around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I start to think that it has gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because the money was tight at the time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he is probably just engaging in outward fanaticism. I knew that he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion, but again, did not judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. Then at one point, when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new, having grown up in upstate New York. I know that animals can get trapped in the walls and die. But this was the garage, and there was no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I would do and decided I would confront him about the smell. I decided to poise the question in a somewhat suggestive way, expanding on his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I will never forget his reaction. His eyes widened, and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What, really?" I said yes, really. And there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage. While I was again doing laundry, he called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up, and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can sparsely remember that I had to be someplace, packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple of months I lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video he made. He is a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and this strange leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of these things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to Oseti Oyata camp during the anti-pipeline protest in Standing Rock, Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose, as I wanted to get out of that house in the worst way. My last night there, I did not give notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again. Started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and sexual violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him he would be caught eventually. Not even holding back my suspicion anymore, he reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense he had been using before. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me. So I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operators started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call piqued the interest of the police sergeant, who was assigned to the call center. So they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they took interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember, and left it at that, feeling just a little better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times, I told my mother about all of this, and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on the G-maps. She put up the street view, and I noticed there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but cannot put together a practical reason for it, or why he'd be using it unless he was moving, or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, this is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I will get closure, or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested. And I read about it. I have grown up poor and been around the lowlife a lot. I have interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. In addition, the writer of this encounter would like to ask that if you may recognize this man and his persona, please feel free to contact them. Email me, and I will get you in contact with the author. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Perhaps click the bell for notifications, and remember, hell is empty, and the devils are here.